Tributes are being paid from around the world to the former US president and Nobel Peace Prize winner Jimmy Carter, who's died at the age of 100. He was a peanut farmer who became the most powerful man in the world, serving one term as president from 1977 to 1981. He's the longest-lived American leader. Well, let's speak now to Ambassador Stuart Eisenstadt, who was President Carter's chief White House domestic affairs advisor during the whole of his time in the Oval Office. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us on BBC News. Amazing to have someone with your knowledge of the president with us. And what was he like during that time? Of course, it was post-Richard Nixon, and all of that entailed what that had done to the American psyche and the belief in democracy.
Well, this is more than a 50-year relationship. I was his policy director when he ran for governor, when he ran for president, and then as chief domestic advisor in the White House from 1977 to 81. And he was, first of all, on a personal level, a Renaissance man. He was a patriot. He was in the U.S. Navy as a submarine officer. He was a poet. He was a preacher. He was an author of 32 books. He was an engineer. He was a great woodcutter. He was a fly fisherman. So on a personal level, he had an astonishing array of interests. He was a tremendously disciplined worker. He came in early and left late. He always insisted on having more information. He wanted the appendices to some of our memos. He would send our memos back with circles around misspellings or split infinitives or grammatical mistakes because he expected exactitude. And yet, on a personal level, again, he allowed all of his senior staff and their families, knowing we worked 24/7 and didn't see our families as much as we could, to come to Camp David, the presidential retreat, on weekends. And I still remember him asking my young teenage son if he would jog with him. He would invite our family over to have movies and popcorn with he and Rosalind. That personal touch was always there, along with being a very demanding taskmaster. He was, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I was wondering, what did he make of that moniker, the peanut farmer? I've always been curious about that.
Well, he was perfectly pleased with it because he was a peanut farmer. That was one of his appeals in the primary. He was a man who worked the earth, who worked the soil. He didn't work in a expensive office. And indeed, I think the most difficult conversation that he and Rosalind, a marriage of 77 years, had was when he was an officer in the Navy, a submarine officer, and his father was dying in planes, and he decided he had to go back to save the business. And Rosalind desperately didn't want to go back to planes. And for the whole trip back from Hawaii, she didn't talk to him. But she became a great partner in the business and a great political partner. And again, one of the most distinguished first ladies, only the second one next to Eleanor Roosevelt to testify in Congress on her own legislation, mental health legislation, and had the first. They had her own office and her own staff in the East Wing of the White House. Now,
so he was a feminist too. One of my earlier guests said that was very much the case, she thought. His international achievements overshadowed domestic achievements. In fact, many critics of his presidency say that his domestic policy agenda didn't live up to what it should have been. Do you think that criticism is fair?
It's absolutely wrong. We got almost 70% of our major legislation passed, one of the highest levels of any president. Our three energy bills created the foundation for the energy security we have today, deregulating oil and gas, starting the whole renewable solar process. All the ethics legislation we have today came from him. He created the Department of Education and increased funding for education. He was a great environmental president, doubled the size of our national parks with the Alaska Lands Bill. And something that was truly transformative is he deregulated all forms of transportation and telecommunications, trucks, airlines bringing air travel to the middle class, railroads. He created the whole era of cable because of his telecommunications deregulation. And here is a Southerner from the deep segregated South who was a great civil rights advocate. He appointed more Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women to federal judgeships and to senior positions in administration than all 38 presidents put together. So he had a very good domestic record. His
Ambassador.
international record was also outstanding, which we can discuss in a second.
Ambassador, unfortunately, we are out of time, but we really appreciate your time and your recollections of that period with President Carter. Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat, thank you very much. And around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.